that was Shine a Light. And Matt, go ahead and run the numbers for me before I get into the bio, because I'm going to do a little bit longer bio than I normally do on this one.
Yep. We're getting up there. This is number 11 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums.
Whoa.
Number 2 in the year 1972. And number 41 overall. And in Rolling Stone's list, they were much higher regarded. It comes in at, where do I have it? Oh, there it is. It's number 14 in Rolling Stone of all time.
Okay, so
wow.
Top 15 all-time albums. So let's give a little bit of background on Exile on Main Street, because this is the end of the run of what's considered to be the Stones' classic 4-album jaunt, shall we say. For recap, let's see how guys, your pop quiz. Go through those albums in order. Matt, I'm going to put it on you.
I have them in front of me, so go to Josh.
Okay, Josh, go through them in order.
Oh God.
Here we go.
I could have done this though, John. I could I could point that out. I could have done this.
Beggar's Banquet.
You got it.
Their Satanic Majesty's Request.
Nope. That was before.
Sticky Fingers.
That's the third one. There's one in between.
What is it?
We did cover it.
Mm-hmm. We did? Oh man. Yep.
That's all right. Sorry to put you on the spot. It's Let It Bleed, okay. Josh. So
right.
Okay. So Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, and now we're Exile on Main Street.
And incidentally, that is the way that Best Ever Albums has them ranked in that order.
Okay, gotcha. Well, some things about this right off the bat. This is the Jagger, Richards, Wyman, Taylor, and Watts lineup, so it's a continuation from Sticky Fingers. It's the Stones' first double album. As we know, the record company kind of released a couple extra American albums of odds and ends as cash grabs. So this is actually the 12th American album from the Stones, but only the 10th British album. Recording on this album started actually all the way back in 1969, and then they continued to piece it together at different points. They were in France for a great deal of this album. They finished it in LA. There's a lot of stories with that that we're going to get into. But one thing to know about this is where Exile on Main Street comes from. Part of it is that the Stones were tax exiles. And I feel that this is going to be something that we're going to talk about quite a bit with 70s European bands, because unlike America, where there's plenty of tax cheats, but they just write the law, right, to pretend that they're not tax cheats, you know, and then everybody pretends they're paying their fair share of taxes, even though they're not, and we just write the law around it. In Europe, on the other hand, if you're one of those people that feels you shouldn't pay taxes, you had to leave the country. They didn't just make it easy on you. And so that was a big thing throughout the 70s in Scandinavian countries, England, and you'd see a lot of people go to France or Switzerland or places that were considered to be more agreeable tax climates. One of the reasons the Stones are tax exiles is the result of that period in which their manager, Alan Klein, we talked about this the last time, pretty much ripped them off and made them give the rights to Wild Horses as a single track to get out of their contract, but he also retained the rights to Brown Sugar, for example.
Didn't they want to release a song called Cocksucker or something?
That was what they did as the one track to meet it, and then the record company said you have to give something else, so they gave Wild Horses instead. But and they ended up getting Brown Sugar. So how that ties into this is, number one, the little money that they had, because they didn't have as much as they wanted. And I shouldn't say little. They had a decent amount of money, but they went through it quickly. And so they were, while not broke, they certainly were struggling for money by rock star standards. And so they went to France as a chance to not pay those taxes because they couldn't pay the tax bills that they had. And it was a chance to kind of, I guess, get well with making money and not having it go out the door to the tax man. So
go to the drug dealer instead.
Well, we're going to talk about drugs because that's another part of this. So that's one thing to know. The other thing, though, is that one of the reasons this became a double album was because they did not want any of their earlier stuff to be claimed by Klein. So they tried to release it on this album with the idea that they could have the rights to it. And so that's why this is as sprawling an album as it is. That was a little bit of the thought process behind that. It did not prove totally successful. He sued them and got to give you the exact thing. He sued them for breach of settlement because 5 songs on the album were during that 1969 period were being composed. And so he got a part of the right to Sweet Virginia, Loving Cup, all down the line, Shine a Light, and Stop Breaking Down. And interestingly enough, the Stones were kind of miffed because Stop Breaking Down is actually a Robert Johnson song that just Jagger and Richards reworked, and it was sort of a labor of love for them. And I think the goal was to originally sort of take that money and use it for something else. And it ended up going to Klein, which I think really pissed them off quite a bit. He actually was able to take those songs and take another thing and actually make an album called More Hot Rocks, Big Hits and Phased Cookies out of it, which, as you might imagine, the Stones did not endorse as a work for them and is not viewed by them in any way as one of their albums. So that is one thing to know. The other thing to know is that while they're in France and Keith Richards is in a mansion, he is using a lot of heroin. I'm talking a lot. And it comes up all the time in stories about this. There is actually some stories, and they do not believe it's exaggerated, that there were like thousands of pounds of heroin coming in per week. And at this point, Graham Parsons, John Lennon, Terry Southern, like all kinds of different people are floating around this house. As you remember from if you're a completist of Combing the Stacks, you know that in Sticky Fingers, we talked about Mick Jagger had married Bianca Jagger and was sort of thinking of himself as a jet setter and cosmopolitan. He actually had his first child as well. So he was in a different place. Mm-hmm. Bill Wyman hated the Keith Richards. I was going to call it a sex mansion, but I think it was more a drug mansion more than anything else. Drug and tax evade, because he's living there with Anita Pallenberg, and
she's doing drugs too.
He's doing a ton of drugs as well.
Yeah. They're doing way too many drugs to have sex. Like they can't even.
Exactly. Yeah. So Keith is in his big, beginning of his big drug phase. Bill Wyman is inconsistently turning up because he's kind of disgusted about going to this mansion and playing. He doesn't want to be there. Mick Jagger is there when he wants to be and not because he's doing his own thing. And Watts and Taylor, the band really at this point was in two different camps. You got a lot of the session players along with Mick Taylor and Keith Richards that were drug users. And then you had Charlie Watts and you had Bill Wyman and Mick Jagger, who were not really drug users. They might dabble here and there, but it was not in any way significant. And so, and also the producer on the album was also part of that clique as well. The chief engineer, Andy Johns, who's a big part of the sound. So yeah, that's another thing to know, is that they were often not in shape to perform during this. And then when they were, Jagger and Wyman sometimes weren't around because Mick Jagger was doing his thing, and Bill Wyman sometimes said, I'm not going there. So how did this sound when they were in France? They didn't have a formal recording area, but they did have Keith Richards' attic and a mobile recording studio and a trailer. And so most of the jam sessions, they would start at 8 at night and go to about 3 o'clock in the morning before, you're in France, but I don't know if you're partaking it because you're basically playing this album and then passing out after doing drugs. And Bill Wyman said on the period, not everyone turned up every night. That was for me one of the major frustrations of this whole period. Things were very different at the mansion, and it took me a while to understand why. And of course, the why was heroin at this time. So that was it. I did find it funny, Matt, though, that Graham Parsons was such an obnoxious guy, apparently, that he was asked to leave this because apparently he was too obnoxious for even like a place full of like full-fledged drug addicts at this point.
He did love his drugs for sure. Yeah.
He did. And what happened was the album was sort of meandering along until they finally go to LA and they go to Sunset Sound, and they get the team back together. They get Nicky Hopkins on piano, Bobby Keys on sax, Jim Price on the horns, and Jimmy Miller on drums. And they go and they knock it out. Mick Jagger basically took charge of the album because everybody else was doing it. Not everybody, but a lot of the people who normally did the sound and their engineer, remember, was doing heroin. So he mixed it, and I'll give you some clips, but he has later said that he did not like the mix of this, and he kind of blamed himself a little, but he said it was kind of what we had to do because it was there. Some other things that are interesting about this is Billy Preston's on keyboards on this, and actually Dr. John is a part of this album as well and added to this. Mick also went around and got a who's who in LA of backup vocalists and gospel singers to do background vocals to add to it. So that was kind of his contributions to the production. So yeah, that's a little bit of the background that's there. This album thematically is about hedonism and sex, as you can hear in it and what it sounds like. And actually, a lot of it's about the concept of time. They were all hitting 30 years old, and they were kind of still playing young man's music. And that was something that Mick Jagger was sort of reconciling with in his life as well. And, he just gotten married and had a kid too. So it makes sense as to why he'd be thinking about this. Another thing to know about this album is at this point, Jagger was loudly saying he was kind of bored of the traditional Southern rock blues revival type of sound the Stones were known for, and wanted to try some other stuff. And with Richards, who was the biggest voice for keeping that sound in full-fledged heroin addiction, Jagger kind of took the controls for the rest of the 70s. And as you'll know, we'll cover a couple more Stones albums, but they do go in a more experimental direction and do stuff. And so the band kind of becomes Mick's for the 70s, and then Keith pretty much kicks the heroin and stuff at the end of the 70s. And they start butting heads a little bit because Richards is like, all right, I'm back, and I kind of want to revisit that again. Some oddities about the album. It's one of the few albums that charted not only #1 in its initial release, but actually its re-release that came out in 2010 also recharted #1.
Wow.
Happy. I'm sure you noticed this, features Keith Richards on vocals. It's one of the rare songs that he sings.
Okay.
And also, critics did not like this album at the time it came out. They were very
too sprawling.
They say mixed all the way down to not there. And Richards pretty notoriously said all the same ones that said this was terrible. We're talking about how transcendent it was 5 or 6 years later. And the revision of this album really did start as early as the mid to late 70s, when critics sort of started saying, I don't know if we were right on that one. But it was pretty much universally not loved. Here's what Jagger and Richards said about this album before we get into your thoughts. In 2003, Jagger was quoted as saying, "Exile is not one of my favorite albums, although I think the record does have a particular feeling. I'm not too sure how great the songs are, but put together, it's a nice piece. However, when I listen to Exile, it has some of the worst mixes I've ever heard. I'd love to remix the record, not just because of the vocals," and I'm sure you guys noticed, by the way, cut in, that Jagger's way in the back on the vocals on this compared to other Stones albums. So that's kind of what he's referring to. But because generally I think it sounds lousy. At the time, Jimmy Miller was not functioning properly. I had to finish the whole record myself because otherwise there were just these drunks and junkies all around. Of course, I'm ultimately responsible for what I'm complaining about, but it's really not good and there's no concerted effort or attention. Jagger also has always said that he found it really interesting that Stones fans have said it's there because it didn't yield any hits. And he kind of was of the thing of, well, if it's that good, how come there weren't hits on it? Keith Richards, on the other hand, says Exile was a double album. And because the double album, you're going to be hitting different areas, including D for Down. And the Stones really did feel like exiles. We didn't start off intending to make a double album. We just went down to the south of France to make an album. And by the time we'd finished, we said, we want to put it all out. The point is that the Stones had reached a point where we no longer had to do what we were told to do. Around the time Andrew Oldham left us, we'd done our time, things were changing, and I was no longer interested in hitting #1 in the charts every time. What I want to do is good shit. If it's good, they'll get it sometime down the road. So that's how they perceived the album. So a little bit of a different view right there. That's 2 different takes. I'm going to get 2 different takes from you guys as well. So we started with Josh last time. Matt, what did you think of this album?
I love this album. I was listening to it this week, and I'm thinking, I don't know. This is this is one of the best straight up rock and roll albums I think that I've heard. I don't know if I can say that it's the best just straight up rock album, but it's up there. This is just, there's no bad songs on here. It is long. And I was just thinking as you were talking, John, I'm trying to think, we've done a couple of double albums. I don't think that there's been a better double album that we've covered than this one. It's, I have to think about. I'm trying to think of the other double albums that we covered, and maybe that's a question we can revisit. But nothing came up to mind.
Frank said we got Mothers of Invention.
This is better than that. It's better than the. I think this is
All Things Must Pass was a triple album.
Yeah,
but really it's a double.
Yeah,
Derek and the Dominoes.
Yep, the White Album.
The White Album. Yep. Country Ray Charles. We
only did Volume 1 though.
We did Volume 1, right? Okay, gotcha.
So I'd probably say that this is. I think that this is better than all of those, mostly because it's more consistent. The White Album I love. The White Album's got Revolution 9. It's got a couple other songs that are like, oh, okay, but this is like, what's a bad song on this? I can't. Even the bad songs, like Maybe I Just Want to See His Face or Let It Loose. Like towards the end, it does lose a little bit of its fastball,
Yes.
but it's But those are still really good songs. I see what they say about the production, and it's not crisp, but it's almost like this really captures the Stones, right? The Stones are not a crisp band. The Stones are a dirty, grimy, rock and roll, seedy band, and this kind of accentuates that to an extent. It just sounds so great for them to create this album with half the band strung out on heroin the whole time is unbelievable. Like how the fact that they were able to do all of this and make it sound this great. So I still think I like Sticky Fingers better as an overall whole. I think there's a little bit more variety on that. I do like it is a tighter album. This is it's a little more sprawling, but for an album that lasts, I don't know what, an hour and 20 minutes or whatever this is, I'm struggling to find any really significant weak areas, but just
hour and 7.
Hour and 7. Yeah. But it's just got, I understand what he's saying that there's no hits on here, but there's songs that could have been hits. And I don't know. That's another question. I'm never exactly sure how a song becomes a hit. It all involves like somebody has to say, well, this is the single, and then it has to be promoted and played in the right way.
Good
and
song with payola.
Yeah. And then it just has to hit. I mean, there's plenty of artists I could like say like, that's a great song. How is that not a hit? You know what I mean? Like that's an objective #1 hit record. So I don't really put a whole lot of stock into that because I think part of it's luck and it's who and paying back in the day it's paying off DJs and all that stuff, but something like Tumbling Dice is great. Loving Cup is a great song. I actually knew that first. It's Fish. I think Fish actually did this entire album when one of their Halloween shows, and they of course they did, and they took a couple of the songs along with them. I know that they do Loving Cup a lot still.
I'm sure they did Turd on the Run because I'm sure that's what that album sounded like. So
I've never heard them play that, but I'm sure that they have. I think they do Shine a Light a lot as well. But just great blues, rock and roll. Just very catchy, very accessible. It's long, right? But it's I don't think it's a bad long. I don't think you cut any track from this. I think this is a great record. I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, this is a great Stones record. I'm not as high on it as Matt is, but Matt's pretty high on it. I think this album comes out of the gate like a shotgun, right? With Rocks Off, and the first 9 tracks are flawless. I think this is a perfect first side, and then it's crazy how I felt like, okay, this is great, and then when it got to Happy, I was like, well, okay, this is not as good, and then I looked at the original track listing, and sure enough, the first 9 are the first LP, mm-hmm. right? And then the rest are the second LP. So this is a testament to why there shouldn't be double albums, because it would be an amazing, probably a monumental Stones record if it was just the first 9 tracks. The fact that they added the double album makes it a very, very good Stones record, but it's not perfect. As a result, I like Sticky Fingers more still. I think that is, in my criteria, perfect Stones, but I agree with Matt. This is what the Stones are all about. It's about the blues. It's about this upbeat rock. It's about these blues ballads. And the thing that I really like about this album is all of the other musicians and backing vocals and everything that they add to them that make them the Stones, because it's really not the 5 of them that make up the Stones completely. It's all of the other stuff that they add, like the horns.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, over and over again in this, you hear the horns and they really punctuate the songs and add to them. The backing singers that add to the songs, the different instruments that come in and out throughout the things, those are as essential to this album as the core Stones are to themselves. And
I can't believe I totally forgot about that, because that's a central thing in here as well. The horns are all over the place here, and they just add this extra layer to it. That's just this excitement, this great sound. And it's one of those things where I've thought for years, I'm like, why didn't more people do that? you know, like, because that is such the way that they use all of those horns, even like faster or slower songs. It's peppered all throughout this record. It's just, I don't understand why more people don't do it, because it's such a great combination the way that they do that. So you're absolutely right, Josh. I can't believe I forgot to mention that, but that's very prominent throughout the entire record.
And I've always appreciated horns way back from my ska days, and this is no exception. It really adds depth to the blues that they play. And
that's right. They do horns in ska. They just don't they don't do horns the way that I want them to do, or the genre that I would like. So that's my own bias. Yeah.
The other, I mean, that's kind of the summary. If I'm surprised there's no hits, because those first 9 songs, like everyone I had heard before or knew, and they are just very catchy and very like upbeat, great songs to listen to. On the backside, I think I really liked Ventilator Blues.
Yeah,
that's a really great kind of deep cut. If this album is considered deep cuts, I don't know. And then Shine a Light's always is nice to hear. That's the name of the Martin Scorsese doc on them as well. And everything, it kind of blurs for me on the back end of the album, to be honest. Some of those songs I don't recognize as in my head as much as the front side. So that's kind of one of the small negatives or nitpicks I have with this. But other than that, it is, I mean, with those 4 classic Stones period that you guys, that we named off, it's a testament to their rock and roll abilities, for sure.
Okay, I've been patient. So first of all, I want to tell you guys are totally wrong. The second half of this, 10 to 18, if they just took it and called it Return to Heroin Mansion, it would still be a tippy top album. There's great songs all over the back end. Happy, Let It Loose, Ventilator Blues, all down the line, Shine a Light are all incredible songs. So differences of opinion, but I want to go on the record and say I don't agree with that. The back end.
I didn't say I didn't like it. I didn't say it.
Great.
I didn't say I didn't like it. I just said I liked the first half a little bit better. That's distinction there.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I love the whole thing.
I totally get if someone thinks an hour and 7 minutes is too long for an album. I do think that if you took this and made it a 12-song album, or you made it 2 9-song albums, it might be a better document. But I'm going to hit you with some, guys. This is the first 60 out of 60 album that we've covered on my chart.
Wow.
There's nothing. Wow. There is nothing wrong with this album. It's a nearly perfect. It is, in my rating scale, it's a perfect rock album.
I am a golden god!
I gotta throw a sound effect in here when you say
there you go, like something. We'll figure out what it is, but it's from start to finish. As Matt said, there's no bad songs. It's somehow 67 minutes. It keeps me engaged the entire time. I feel this both in my gut and in my man parts, which is how rock and roll is supposed to feel. You know what I mean? It's supposed to be visceral, and it's supposed to make me feel good and edgy, and it's not complex in the Pink Floyd way, and I'm not using that as a way to knock Pink Floyd. It's not complex or Yes or anything like that. It's complex only in the sense that there's a lot of different pieces playing here, and they're not doing overly crazy stuff, but they just sound great together. Right. I really like the edge and the swagger that mixed lyrics have here. It's once again, it's a continuation of Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers, where it's a real like thumbing your nose, middle finger at different conventions, and it's a lot. They do something that's so hard to do, which is take a type of music that they are not from the tradition of, in this case, roots Southern rock, and they're able to do it, but not in a way that in any way is condescending or derivative or sloppy. They add a twist to it that just works, and that is so hard to do. The album just kicks ass from start to finish. It's my favorite album we've covered in the 70s. As much as I love Sticky Fingers and Let It Bleed, and I do, and I'm actually very partial to Aftermath as well. I've always liked that album quite a bit, but this is, with the exception of the length, I think that if you listen to this, if the length bothers you, just listen to it as 2 9-song albums.
Yeah.
And maybe you hear it like Matt and Josh do, where one sounds better than the other. And where they cut it on the EP is a fascinating cut because it does have a different feel. But for me, the different feel is the song placement on this album is excellent. Like everything hits where it should hit. And the riffs, both the guitar riffs, the bass riffs, the rhythm, are all great. And you can lock in on any of those riffs weaving in and out. You can decide to go into all the background horns and piano and go that way if you want. You have to search for Mick a little bit more on this album than normal. He's blended into the background, which probably is why he doesn't like the mix, although he was largely responsible for it, so go figure. But it works on this album because, once again, he does that thing where he's kind of like another instrument on this. I don't think that, like Sabbath, that's always has to be how Mick is experienced, because when he goes out in the front, it works just as well. And as we go later into the Stones, he's very much out front. If you start thinking about mid to late 70s Stones stuff, he's right in front. I'll give you an example. Like, we sometimes for Cold List and Hot Take use like She's So Cold, right? And he's right up in front on that one. And the great guitar riffs are snaking behind him, but they're very much snaking behind him at the front in the production. That's not the case here at all. This is the last Keith album for a while where he has, I think, an equal partnership with Mick, and then it kind of becomes Mick taking the controls and Keith doing what he needs to do. Still writing those riffs, but this is when he's at his creative peak, in my opinion. I've always, as much as I like Brian Jones and other guitarists later, like Ron Wood and stuff, Mick Taylor for me is the perfect compliment for this band. And Charlie Watts doesn't get in the way. He does what he's supposed to do, because you don't want a drummer doing too much with this. And they're also bringing in other drummers as set drummers at different times on this too, to help add different stuff, and different bassists along with Wyman and stuff like that. So you even get different feels in terms of those session players. So can't speak highly enough about this album. It's an awesome album. It's a must listen. You really, with that Stones run of those 4 albums, you can't go wrong with any of those albums. No. But and I often add Aftermath in that run too. I pretend that they're Satanic Majesties, and I think is it Between the Buttons? Is that the other one that's in there? Which is also a good album, but I kind of just forget the Stones. I feel like just took a little dovetail to try to.
They try to do something different. They try to do something a little bit more of the time, and let's do a Sgt. Pepper like psychedelic kind of thing. And it's like, it's not really, and
it was ambitious, but it's not essential by any means. And so, but this is how I want to introduce anybody to the Stones. That 4-song rip or 4-album rip of those.
Easily. And
we're going to be covering some stuff later, like I think Goat's Head Soup follows this, and you've got Some Girls comes later at the back end of the decade. Actually, I think it's the beginning of the 80s, might be 80, like Tattoo You comes, and so there's some interesting stuff later, but this is peak Stones for sure. And
Some Girls 78, Tattoo You 81.
81, okay, so a little bit later there. And it's Goat's Head Soup, right? Emotional Rescue, I think.
I don't know if we're doing Goat's Head Soup. Goat's Head Soup is ranked is in 1973 and ranked 306 in Best Ever Albums.
And I don't think we're doing it. It's Black and Blue. I think that's in the
Black and Blue is later. 1976.
76, mid-70s,
Although the album cover looks like an 80s album.
Well, and then the other one is Emotional Rescue, right? Is that 70s?
Emotional Rescue is set in 1980.
Oh, it's 80. Okay, gotcha. Yep. So I think we only cover Some Girls and Tattoo You down the road. Yep. But there's other stuff to go there, and there's some interesting stuff. But highest recommend for this album. This is a awesome album. It's both of its time in 1972 and totally transcends its time of 1972, which is the best thing possible when you're listening to an older album, that it's everything. Yeah.
Would you introduce the Stones to this? Somebody who hadn't heard the Stones with this album? I
actually would probably pick either Aftermath or Sticky Fingers would be my two. I actually think Aftermath in many ways is the most accessible Stones album, and you kind of get a feel for what the guitar sounds like, but without the grittiness that might turn some people off. And if you get them in, then you can say, oh, if you like that, wait till you hear when they turn it up. And that's kind of what Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers becomes, even Between the Buttons Beggar's Banquet even starts to go down that. Yeah, so
I
that
was
would be where I'd start.
I was introduced to the Stones really through an album through Sticky Fingers, and so that worked for me, you know. And Aftermath I didn't really know till this podcast, and I really like that one too. So either one of those would probably be good.
And I would say, can I just say one thing real quick too? I think that like there was a period of time where everybody recognized the Stones were one of the best bands ever, and then it kind of became uncool to say this, or just people didn't say it anymore, and somehow the Stones don't get talked about as much as they used to as a great band, at the expense of just other bands have become better. The Stones are still one of the best freaking bands that has ever existed, and if people forget it, they need to go back and listen to this stuff. And as you said, Matt, as a pure rock and roll album, it's unimpeachable.
Yeah. And the fact that there are so many songs that are all kind of in the same lane, what it's doing, the fact that it doesn't get old, you know, it's not like they're hitting the same note kind of in a way, but they're also doing it. They're also throwing in different things to differentiate them. But it's all just so good. This is just such good music. It's just what it comes down to. When you know, this is the blues. When you do a little bit, you know, you put a little bit more of an edge to it. You put some, you know, cool little guitar licks and some cool the horns and just the whole package. You're just taking one of the most basic forms of popular music, and you're making it work on such a basic level, but on a level that just hits everything perfectly. That's what I got out of this. Like, I remember when I first got this, to me, when I first listened to Exile on Main Street many years ago, it was a little bit of I was like, wow, there's a lot of songs on here. You know what I mean? And I think that part of the issue maybe with the second half of a double album is not necessarily always that this first half is always better. It's maybe there's some fatigue. I think, you know, I get the idea, sure. And I got, you know, so maybe I'm wondering if they reversed it, right? If they did the second album was the first one, you listen to that first, you know, would people think of it differently? I don't know, but but I think that when I initially listened to it, it was it seemed like a lot. And so I never really got as much. I think it's, you know, like Sticky Fingers is much more digestible, but I really like going back to it this week because, you know, I was going, it's one great song after another. I don't dislike anything on here at all.
Can I mention something too? If Down in the Hole by Alice in Chains is what I imagine heroin's like, and Super Freak by Rick James is what I imagine taking cocaine is like, I think Sweet Virginia is what I know getting drunk in a way that you probably had a couple too many is like. And that to me is kind of like, that song is a drunk song, but like a song, it's not a bad drunk, like Debaser by the Pixies might be. That's a song I think of, like, but that Sweet Virginia is like when it's like, I probably had a couple and I got to make sure I get to where I need to get. And it's that uneven sort of like, you know, frayed guitar, just, you know, unsteady. Well, that's something. It builds up a little bit and it gets more and more unhinged as it goes on. I just wanted to throw that out there because I always thought that song,
But that's like a song that you could just get a bunch of people in a bar singing together, like at the end of the night, you know, definitely. Like it's a sing along kind of a thing. Yeah.
Do you guys hear those production stuff that Nick was talking about? Or
I listened to the remastered version from 2010.
I did too. Yeah.
And so I heard the version that probably sounded a little bit more like what he wanted. I have heard it before though, the old version of it. And the only thing I know about it, and you even see it in the remaster, is that Mick's in the back a lot. And I wonder if that's what he's getting at, because he does blend in a little bit.
To me, it's not just that. There is a little bit of a grimier sound, I think, with this record than with some of the stuff that they did before.
Like muddier, you mean? Like not as clear?
Like the fact that they were using a portable studio totally makes sense, right? Yeah. It's like second, maybe third rate equipment.
Yep.
That they're still able to really make work, that they still have talented, you know, engineers and producers to still make all that stuff work, but they weren't playing with top of the line equipment. Yep. But I also don't think that it does this album any disservice. Like I said before, I think that this is one of the cool. This is like it's capturing the essence of the Stones.
Well, and it's like it's probably the walls are leaking a little bit, you know, in terms of the sound bleeding out, like on like a studio. But that's like what it would be like to see the Stones at a bar.
Yeah,
because the sound, and I think it's an attribute for them.
Yeah,
but it definitely sounds, as Matt said, lower grade recording than something like Aftermath did, which was a clean, crisp like when you listen to like Under My Thumb and then you listen to this, you can't even, or, Stupid Girl, from that out. Those are very produced songs. And then this doesn't have any song that's like that.
But if done well like this, there's something to be said for both, like crisp, clear, and then the distorted,
especially blues,
right?
Bluesy.
It's dirty, yeah.
Yeah.
It's no, that's great.